Hello, we're reading from Slavery in America, and we're reading Alan Kulikoff's um, section on the slave life cycle. So let's continue. Beginning to work coincided, or this is just start the headlines, leaving home. Beginning work coincided with the departure of many children from their parents, siblings, and friends. The fact that about 54% of all slaves in single slave households in Prince George's in 1776 were between 7 and 15 years of age suggests that children of those ages were typically forced to leave home. Young blacks were most frequently forced from large plantations to smaller farms. The parent's authority was eliminated, and the child left the only community he had known. Tension and unhappiness often resulted. For example, Hagar, age 14, ran away from her master in Baltimore in 1766. She is supposed to be harbored in some Negro quarter, he claimed, as her father and mother encourages her in elopements under a pretense she is ill used at home. Courtship, marriage, and family life. Courtship and marriage, defined here as a stable sexual union, led to substantial but differential changes for slave women and men. The process began earlier for women. Men probably married in their middle to late 20s, women in their late teens. Men who initiated the courtship typically searched for wives by visiting a number of neighboring plantations and often found the wife near home, though not on the same quarter. Some evidence for this custom suggested, but hardly conclusive, can be seen in the sex and age of runaway slaves. Only 9% of all Southern Maryland runaways, 1745 to 1779, and 12% of all Virginia runaways, 1730 to 1787, were women. Few men, relative to the total population, ran away in their late teens, but numbers rose in the early 20s when the search for wives began and crested between 25 and 34, when most men married and began families. Courtship on occasion ended in a marriage ceremony, sometimes performed by a clergyman, sometimes celebrated by the slaves themselves. Slave men had to search their neighborhood to find a compatible spouse because even the largest quarter contained few eligible women. Some of the potential mates were sisters or cousins, groups blacks refused to marry. When they were excluded, few choices remained on the quarter. The youths looked everywhere. Most planters owned too few slaves on too few quarters to permit a wide choice of spouses within their plantations. Furthermore, they could not afford to purchase the husband or wife. Inevitably, a majority of slave couples remained separated for much of their married lives. After the relationship was consumed, the slave woman probably stayed with her family, parents and siblings, until a child was born, unless she could form a household with her new husband. Childbearing and the child rearing that followed were highly important rites of passage for most slave women. Once she had a child, she moved from her mother's or parents' home to her own hut. The bonding between the slave mother and her child may have been far more important than her relationship with her husband, especially if he lived on another plantation. Motherhood, moreover, gave women a few valued privileges. Masters sometimes treated pregnant women and their newborn children with greater than usual solicitude. For example, Richard Corbin, a Virginia planter, insisted in 1759 that his steward be kind and indulgent to pregnant women and not force them when the child upon any service or hardship that will be injurious to them. Children were to be well looked after because children were a good investment. Um, That's from Alan Kulikoff's The Slave Life Cycle, and it's from a larger book. If you go to my other video, the title of that book is there. Um, and when we look at a black life on the slave plantation, I could be wrong. You tell me. It's very similar to life today. Very similar. Um, except there's weird. I don't want to say weird, but there's a weird kind of thing lately where you'll have a group of people and two will be dating or married, and then they get a divorce, and then the man will get with somebody else within that group. No, not his cousin or his relative, but say my wife has her friends and I know them, and we've gone to dinners and weddings and things together because we're in the same circle, and I divorce my wife and then get with somebody in the same circle. That's, I think, something relatively new, especially when there's so many black people now. Back then, they fought and struggled and had to fight. But this black men rolling out of one woman and rolling over right to the closest one, I mean, it's a odd thing, but it's another decline of black people. And sometimes when you read slave culture, you can get a little depressed because you say, well, man, they seem to be a little more cohesive than we were. Of course, they were forced to be, but we're in bad conditions and we still are not as unified as they were. And we're nowhere near what they were in the Reconstruction. So hopefully, after this year, a lot of this stuff will change. Hopefully, black people will stop the decline and start to ascend again out of the pit that we've been pushed into and held into. So we'll see. Until next time, I thank you for your support, and I say take care of your mind, take care of your body, and be safe.